Hey, campfire crew, let's get it on. My UFO sighting on I-64, submitted by Brad L. I am a 36-year-old male with a straight-laced past and present, so the experience I had was in no way conjured from the side effects of any legal or illegal substances. It was late winter of 2000, between the early morning hours of 1 a.m. and 2 a.m., when I experienced something I never could comfortably explain, and I'll never forget. I am a bit of an impulsive individual, and boredom beckons my urge to travel no matter the destination, and in this case my destination was my family's farm, about an hour and a half southeast of St. Louis, in Perry County, Illinois. I have always been a bit of a night owl, so when I could not stand the confines of the city, I decided I needed to get out to the country and do some late-night trail riding on my new ATV. So I packed a bag, jumped in my truck, and started on a drive I had taken 1,000 times before. But this time, it would be like no other drive I had ever taken. I left St. Louis just before 1 a.m., headed south on I-64. Aside from the same few cars playing leapfrog for the past 35 miles and the bright high beams of oncoming vehicles, the drive was going smoothly. I was getting to the point of my drive where I could finally see something that had always captured my eye on this boring drive. There is a small town on the east side of I-64 that has a beautiful church that dominates the horizon due to the lights that illuminate its steeple. As I approached an overpass that marks the point where I can look off to my left and see the church, I noticed something far more spectacular dominating the night sky. I became entranced with a light that burned brighter than any artificial light I have ever seen, but strangely, it didn't seem to illuminate anything, at least not in the way I was used to seeing. This light had no true shape to it, so I have a hard time explaining exactly what it was I saw. It was just a very bright light that didn't seem to move. This light was about 800 yards east of the highway and about 500 feet in the air, so it was pretty close considering the intensity and mass of it. As I observed the light, I noticed that it felt like time itself slowed down, but little did I know it was just because I was coming to a crawl. I looked at my speedometer and I was going about 30 miles an hour, and I thought to myself, people should have blown by me now as I looked around, but it seemed like everyone was doing the same speed as me. As I focused on the traffic around me, that's when I noticed something truly strange starting to happen. The interior of everyone's vehicles were becoming illuminated. It looked like that scene from Christine when the car is trying to kill his girlfriend, or the scene from Close Encounters of the Third Kind when Richard Dreyfuss encounters the UFO for the first time in his truck. That's the best way I can describe it. The people in their vehicles seemed to be completely oblivious to the object in the sky, and whatever it was they were experiencing in that dead light, and I call it a dead light because I soon realized my cab is becoming illuminated, and it didn't seem to be bright, but everything was so illuminated and it couldn't seem to penetrate the glass to illuminate anything beyond the cab. At this point, a bit of panic set in, but I couldn't seem to speed up time, much less my truck, so all I could do was watch this light in the sky and the comatose people around me for the next 2 miles. After I traveled those long 2 miles, I finally hit a second overpass that marks the end of any visibility of the small town, the beautiful church, or the strange light that consumed me and a handful of others for how long I couldn't say. I do know that as soon as I was beyond the hill with the second overpass, it was like someone hit play. The rest of the drive was uneventful, and I made no stops for food, gas, or to clean the crap from my britches. I arrived at the farm at 3:30 in the morning. Driving home. I can't say for sure what happened to me this night, but here's what I know. I was driving home for the weekend from school at Indiana University. It takes me about 2 hours to get home, and I left Bloomington around 10 p.m. At exactly 10:53, I was on a rural stretch of 2-lane highway that I take home, and I noticed what appeared to be flashing lights behind me. I thought, oh great, I'm getting pulled over. So I turned onto the next country road about a quarter of a mile from where I noticed the lights. As the car came to a stop and I started to open my glove box to get out my registration and proof of insurance, the lights suddenly disappeared, but no car drove past. Now, here's where the story takes a turn for the weird, and I'm sure you guys will think I'm just making it all up because it really does seem like something straight out of a typical UFO movie or story. The electronics in my car started to go haywire. The radio was randomly changing stations while the volume kept going up and down, while the dome light and headlights started to flicker and turn off and back on again. It was now 10:56 p.m., and I started thinking to myself that my battery must be failing, or else I have a short somewhere in the electric system of the car. So I leaned down to pop the hood and take a look at the battery, and that's the last thing I remember doing. The next thing I knew, I opened my eyes and saw nothing but the night sky full of bright stars. It was a cold night, and it seemed like I had never seen stars that bright in my life. I sat up and looked around, and I saw absolutely nothing. I mean, nothing at all. I was in the middle of a field, surrounded by corn stalks left over from the recent harvest. As I started to come to my senses, I started to freak out. I mean, where was I? Why the fuck was I asleep in the middle of a field? Where the fuck's my car? I got up and started walking toward the distant headlights I could see from a road about a half-mile away. I got to the nearest intersection, and I looked at the signs which read 350 north and 50 west. I was half a mile away from my car, which was just right off the main road. I started walking towards the headlights I could see on the main road, and I can't say how long it took me to walk that half mile, but it couldn't have been more than 10 or 15 minutes. When I arrived at my car, all the lights were out. My battery had died, which struck me as odd because I hadn't been gone for that long. I looked at my phone, which was sitting on the passenger seat, and the time was 2:17 a.m. Over 3 hours had passed since I turned off onto the side road for the flashing lights behind me. I remember sitting in my car completely dumbfounded, wondering what the hell had just happened to me. About a half hour of just sitting there, I remembered that my battery was dead, so I got on my cell and called AAA to come out and give me a jump. It took about an hour for them to come out to me since I was a good distance away from the nearest town, and during which time I just sat in silence, running through the possible scenarios in my head concerning what had just happened. To this day, I couldn't tell you what really happened to me that night. All I know is I can't think of any plausible explanation as to why I woke up over a half mile away from my car in the middle of a cornfield more than 3 hours after I had stopped. I've only shared this story with one other person, my uncle. I'm sure people would look at me like I'm crazy or they would call bullshit on the whole story if I told them, and I can't blame them. If someone came to me with a story like this that so closely mirrors the stereotypical encounter story, I probably wouldn't believe them either. My UFO story. I've only told a few people this, and can't believe I'm typing it out for you. I found your channel last month and really like what you do and what you offer. Sometimes I've heard the same things from Reddit, but by and large you've got stories that no other horror narrator has. And I like that. So here's another one for you if you would like to read this. Before I begin, I want to say that this is true. I'm honestly thinking about taking a polygraph test about this to see what it says, but that would mean telling yet another person. Anyway, here goes. It was 1998 and just turning summer. I lived near a bunch of lakes and was an avid fisherman and had just gotten home from work and decided to throw some lures around to see if I could snag a bass or two before dinner, and then head back home where my friends were coming over to kill a case of beer and watch the NHL playoffs. I got my gear, a can of Coke, and walked to the end of my dead-end street. There was a path through the woods that ran about a quarter of a mile to a little lake or pond, whatever, and that's where I was going to fish for a bit. The trail snakes through some pretty dense forest, but you could still see the sky through the tops of the trees, and I remember how warm it felt even though it was mid-May. I live in the Northeast, and it's just getting warmer at that time of the year most of the time. So I get to the spot and start casting away, and after half an hour, I hear this humming, like the way a big helicopter sounds when it's coming towards you, but is still kind of far away. I didn't think anything of it, just that, a helicopter. I kept fishing, caught a couple of smallmouth bass with my favorite crayfish lure, and then noticed that the humming was still there. Then this piercing sound came out of nowhere, like an old-time train slamming on the brakes, and man, was it loud. I looked all around me, but there was nothing there, and then just like that, it was gone. All of it. Total silence. No more sounds of the forest surrounding the lake, no bugs, zip. I didn't know what to make of it. I figured it was time to head back and order some food for my boys, and when I got back to the forest trail, all of the sounds came back. I figured I'd just keep all of it to myself. 3 of my buddies came over, and we ate and had a bunch of beers. Our team beat the Caps 2-0 in Game 1, and we all just hung out for a while afterwards before they all took off. I was still living at home at the time, but my parents were out of town and I had the house to myself for a couple of weeks. I cleaned up and then thought I'd take a walk and get some air, so I let my dogs out in the backyard and I just stood outside looking around, and that's when I saw a bright light at the east end of the street, where the lake was. There was a wicked bright light, like a shopping plaza was at the end of my street and not forest. I mean, that forest ran for about 2 miles before the next street in development, so this was very unusual. As the light stayed there, I just stared at it thinking maybe the blue was playing with my head, but I had only had like 4, so I knew that wasn't it. The dogs wanted to go back in and get some food, so I let them in and went to my next-door neighbor's house whose lights were still on. I knocked on his side door, but no one answered, so I went home, looked at the sky again, and then said to myself, I need to check this out. I ran to my room, grabbed my sheath knife and one of those Co.Ag disposable cameras they used to make, along with a small flashlight. I made sure my dogs were good, and then down the street I went, heart racing, as the light was still there in the sky. I made my way down the path with my mag light and put it out when I got closer to the lake. I could see the bright light through the trees. I mean, this wasn't bullshit. This was real. I slowed up and then skirted the edge of the path and got behind a big tree right at the end before it opened up to the lake. I looked around it, and across the lake on the far side was what I can only say was a craft. It was shaped like a frisbee with a chunk out of the front, like a U but rounder in the back end. I'm doing a bad job of describing this, but that's the best I can do. There were lights coming from the bottom of it, and it looked like it was sort of just hovering there and lighting up the whole place. This lake was about 1 mile long and maybe 2 football fields wide, and the entire clearing was lit up. I'm not gonna lie, I was freaking the fuck out. I was scared but exhilarated at the same time. I was into UFOs and all that shit as a kid, and I was convinced I was now seeing the real thing. I must have sat there for 10 minutes before remembering I had the camera, and I slowly pulled it out of my sweatshirt. I held it up and ran the wheel to make sure I was ready to take a picture, and then hit the button. Bam! The flash went off, and before I knew it, there was a wicked bright beam pointed right over at my direction. I fell back and kind of crab-walked backwards into the trees until I rammed my head into one and then just sat there stunned. This light was piercing through the trees, and I just knew this thing, whatever it was looking for what made that light. I'm so fucking stupid, I thought. I lay there up against the tree for another minute, and the spotlight or whatever it was went out. Then the other lights, just boom, were gone. Everything was dark. I didn't move, but looked up to see the trees and that there were no stars out, which didn't make sense. It was a clear night. Then suddenly, off to my left, bang! There was this bright, thin stream of light in the woods playing around the forest floor through the trees. Was this thing looking for me? I just sat there frozen, scared shitless. The beam of light went off and I finally breathed, and I looked up and saw the stars were out again. When I rolled over and looked up the path to my street, I saw the beam again cutting through the trees. It was then that I realized this ship or whatever was flying over the forest, and that's what blocked out the stars. But it made no sound. I mean, it was completely quiet. The light went out, and I started to run up the path, thinking if I got out under the streetlights, it wouldn't be there anymore. And that was correct. I hit the pavement and booked it to my house and flew inside. I never once looked up at the sky or looked back to see if this thing was still there. My dogs came running up to me and then stopped and started barking at me. I was so shook up I didn't think about why they didn't attack me with love the way they always did. I just grabbed another beer out of the fridge and sat down in the dining room. The dogs stood looking at me and sort of whimpering, and I noticed a funny smell, like nutmeg or something. I sniffed at my sweatshirt, and whatever it was on me, and that was the smell. I took my beer to the shower and threw my clothes on the floor and then got cleaned up. When I got out, the dogs, 2 labs by the way, were sitting outside the bathroom waiting for me. They thumped their tails and got up to play, and that's what I did, at the same time calling my friend I'll call A to tell him what had just happened. He listened and thought I was bullshitting him, and I told him to come over tomorrow after work and I'd show him what was up. He laughed and said okay. I had another beer, let the dogs out, got them back in, and then went to bed. The next evening when we both got out of work, A came over and we walked down to the lake with my dogs. He was making fun of me and I was telling him I was serious and getting pissed. When we got to the water, I pointed across to where the thing had been and we skirted over to check it out. When we got there, he just whistled and said, "Holy shit, man." All the grass had been singed and it stank like that nutmeg smell. The dogs were barking at the spot and wouldn't get near it, and even some of the trees off to the side had been burned a little, and after a few minutes I just said, "You believe me now?" A nodded and said I should tell someone. "Yeah, like who?" I remember laughing. "I don't know, man," he said, "but this is pretty weird." We went back to my house talking about what I should do, but I decided nothing, and just to leave it as having a cool story to tell when I was older. A left, I made something to eat and was going to just veg out with some PlayStation for the night. I can't remember when I fell asleep, but it was well past dark. I woke up and Tomb Raider was still on my TV, and I turned the set off. On the screen, I saw a thin light and thought, well, that's not right, and looked at it harder. Then I realized it was a reflection of the windows behind me. I turned around, and that light I saw the night before was playing all over my backyard and my neighbors' yards too. One of my dogs got up and looked over the windowsill and barked at the light as it swept from yard to yard. And that's when I froze. Was whatever that thing was looking for me again? I ran over to our sunroom that has a skylight and looked out to nothing but black. The ship was over our houses. Practically tripping over my other dog, I ran to the phone and called 911, but my cordless phone was just making these odd clicking noises, and I couldn't get a dial tone. I ran to the basement where we still had an old-style rotary phone, and that didn't work either. Both of my dogs were barking now, and I could hear the dogs on either side of my house barking too. Lights came on in the backyards, and when I looked out the window, I could see my neighbors walking out into their yards, so I went out there too and called out to them. They turned to me and asked, "Did you see that light too?" I nodded and looked up, but all we could see were stars. I'll never forget the look on one of my neighbors' face when he said, "What in the fuck was that all about? Was it a helicopter?" The other neighbor said he didn't hear a helicopter, and they started going back and forth, so I just said goodnight and went inside. I picked up the cordless phone, and it worked fine. I figured at this point there was no need to call the cops, and I noticed it was 3:30 in the morning, so I just crashed on the living room couch. Nothing happened for over a week. A was true to his word and didn't say anything about what we had seen. Our hockey team got bounced by the Capitals, so we weren't getting together until beach volleyball started up later. I thought about telling my father, but again, what was I going to say? Ask the neighbors they saw a funny light too? I put it out of my mind and spent the summer working, riding my mountain bike, and fishing. I met a nice girl at a race, and we began dating, and we're married now. And I thought about telling her, but didn't want to chase her off with weird shit, but it would become evident on its own later. I said I haven't told many people, but she ended up seeing it on her own. More to come. It was Christmas time, and I had gotten a new pair of snowshoes for the holiday and was jonesing to test them out. It was a couple of days past Christmas, and I had the day off, and my girlfriend was going to come over that night for a fire and some board games or whatever with my family. She couldn't get there until like 9 because she worked at a store in the mall, and I thought I'd try out the shoes after dinner. So around 7:30, I left in the dark for the lake with my gear and was having a blast on these bear paws. When I got down the path to the now frozen lake, I was thinking about clearing the snow on the ice for a hockey rink like I usually did, when suddenly there was a whoosh. Not a sound, but I could feel it. I mean, it's really hard to explain, but it was like a ton of snow had just suddenly fallen down and all at once without a sound. I looked up, and the sky was blocked. The ship or UFO or whatever it was right over me, and like seconds before it hadn't even been there. It silently moved over the lake, and I tried to get an idea of how big it was, but that proved hard with nothing to scale it. It seemed like it was the size of the lake, but of course that wasn't the case. As I watched, it hovered over the same spot I had first seen it, and that bright light came out again and scanned all around the lake and settled on me. I put my hands up to shield from the brightness, and I could feel like a tug and a push, like this thing was rocking me back and forth on my feet. I don't know how long I was standing there, but I remember feeling that something was approaching me on both sides, and from the corners of my eyes I saw two things. I can't say they were grays or had big eyes like everyone says aliens look. I couldn't say they weren't human. I could only see shapes. Then the light went out, and there was nothing there. The UFO was gone, the stars were out, and the push from behind came again, and I turned around to see my girlfriend standing there. "What are you doing out here?" she asked. "Your parents said you went for a walk a while ago and didn't come back. And what was that all about?" I didn't know what to say other than, what was what? She looked at me and said, "Oh, so you didn't see that really bright light, like right in front of you just a minute ago? Are you high?" I just stood there. My hands were cold, and I looked down, and my gloves weren't on my hands. They were on the ground next to me in the snow, and I know I hadn't taken them off. "Oh, yeah, I saw that," I said quickly. "I think it was a helicopter or something." How funny that I was now using an excuse I once thought was lame. "Okay, well, who were those guys?" "What guys?" "Those guys you were talking to and laughing with." I literally had no idea what she was talking about. I looked around, and all I saw were tracks in the snow leading away from me in either direction, skirting around the lake. "Oh, just some guys were out here ice fishing." She wasn't buying it and gave me a look that said, "I'm not buying it." "Okay, and where are they now? They ran away that fast?" I told her we should just get back home, and then I decided to tell her the whole story. She believed me. Oh, it was 9:30 now, by the way. I had no recollection of what had happened when that beam hit me until now. We got home. My parents were asking where the hell I was, and I made up a story to bullshit them. My dad gave me a hard look like he knew something was off, but I just took my things off, got 2 beers, took my girlfriend over to the fireplace, and sat down. We talked all about it except for the one part I didn't remember. What happened when the bright light hit me? Those 2 beings on my sides, and how all that time had passed without me understanding or knowing it. My now wife would never have believed me if she hadn't stumbled into whatever it was going on. But she did, and she does. To this day, she's one of only 4 people who know about this, and I'm keeping it that way. Uncle Josh, don't use my name for this, and I won't be using this email again either. That's my story, as best as I can remember it. Thanks. In the Wildfire. I was in a wildfire just south of Dugway Proving Grounds in Utah. We were in fire rigs driving to the incident area, 4 trucks in close convoy, when we heard helicopters. 8 black military choppers escorted us in formation for like 10 miles, and we assumed they were just doing drills and using us for fake target practice or something. A little while later, we were parked and about to start hiking to the fire line when suddenly a thin column of smoke shot up about 200 feet into the sky. It was a good mile away, but the concussion was pretty significant when it hit us, and the noise was ridiculously loud. Again, we thought it was probably no big deal. We knew we were near a strike zone. A good 5 minutes later, an aircraft like nothing I have ever seen flew by us at maybe 500 feet. It was flat black and sort of rectangular, but with fins and wells on the underside. It was moving pretty slow and was dead silent, so I have to assume it was some sort of stealth glider. I mean, I know it sounds ridiculous, but it immediately reminded me of a huge flying Batmobile, Tim Burton era. After that, some military personnel got on our radio frequency and instructed us to leave the area immediately. When our crew chief asked who it was, they signed off, and the incident commander, who's the guy in charge of managing the entire situation, came on the radios and said we were evacuating the area immediately. They sent us to a completely different fire about 100 miles to the south and never told us why, except that it was higher priority, which was bullshit. It was already out when we got there, and we just assisted crews in the mop-up operation. The thing that confuses me about this is that if the Army didn't want us to see that shit, or if it was dangerous, why didn't they keep us clear of the area in the first place? Either a communication breakdown, or they now had a shit situation going down and had to get us out of there without any warning. This happened to me. The first time I had ever seen anything, I was 7 years old in Houston, Texas. I used to like to climb on top of my mom's Suburban in the driveway and stare at the stars, and one night I saw an intensely bright light floating over the tree line, probably about a half-mile away. I hollered, but no one came to see it, and I didn't see anything else until March of 2008. This experience happened between the 10th and the 15th, but I can't give a specific date because I was up for 4 days trying to come up with some explanation to satisfy what I had seen. This was in Tuscaloosa, Alabama. My mother lived in a garden home community, and all the houses the same size, all one story, and you had great visibility distance-wise. I walked out of my buddy's place at exactly 4 a.m. to a bright, starry night, and when I walked out, something caught my eye to the left. I looked over and saw a bright blue, yellow, green, white, red, orange, strobing, flashing light floating silently to the left. I stood in awe and didn't want to go grab anyone because I didn't want to miss anything. I watched as it passed in front of the moon behind my friend's place, and I saw an outline of a craft. It was shaped like a teardrop, a sunflower seed type shape, and the craft seemed to have lights being transmitted from the top half of it. It was almost as if it was transmitting some type of light pattern upward. It also had a dark, thin, smooth line of exhaust that disappeared 50 or 75 feet behind it. And after it passed the moon, I ran inside and grabbed my friend, and he came out and saw it, but it was too far away to make out what it was. I went home, which was only a few blocks away, and looked out from the driveway, the same direction the first craft had come from. I saw 2 dim white lights slowly coming over the horizon at a slow pace, heading directly towards me. I ran inside and grabbed my mother out of bed, and she came outside with me, and we stood there for about 20 minutes while 5 separate craft flew over us. First came 2, then 2 more, and then another one, maybe about 6 or 7 minutes apart from one another. Maybe 20 miles an hour, maybe 200 feet up. All of them were completely silent. The way that they looked from underneath was that each one had 2 huge bright white lights, which were maybe 30 or 40 feet across each, but they were so bright it was hard to get a good estimate. They also had a pulsating red one between the white lights that dimmed and relit. I would estimate from the size of the white lights that each craft was maybe between 150 to 200 feet wide. The last craft that flew over us flew over lower and slower than the first 4 had, and then it made a noise. It let out a sound that haunts me to this day, and then came another sound. The craft did this twice. They flew directly over us, and I believe that the sound was an acknowledgement. Whatever was piloting knew that we were there watching it, kind of like a hello. I immediately started crying. I had no idea what I was looking at or what I had just heard. The second big experience I had occurred a couple of weeks later. I was standing in my driveway smoking a cigarette listening to my iPod somewhere around 2 a.m. I decided to pause my iPod to turn on the backlight and waved my hand over it a couple of times, making somewhat of a strobe pattern. I didn't hear anything. I didn't see anything come up, but I got that I'm being watched feeling. I looked up, and directly above me was a trapezoid-shaped craft with rounded edges that had dark red and black pulsating glowing outlines to it. It was like flowing electricity, I guess. It wasn't even 75 feet up. I mean, I could have hit this thing with a rock if I threw it at it. I stood there while it hovered directly above me, completely silent for maybe 10 to 15 seconds while it made this kind of motion, similar to the ball that Luke trained with in Star Wars, you know, when he was playing with his lightsaber. It hovered side to side, front to back in a smooth motion, never getting more than 20 feet away from its original position. I mean, it was extremely fascinating, but I was frozen stiff. After those few seconds, I waved one hand at it in a friendly manner, and then it changed its light pattern and hovered away behind my house. Upon deeper inspection, the fact that it knew I saw it but made no effort to evade my detection makes me think it wanted me to follow it, although I was way too freaked out to think about that at the time. I've seen the same craft on 3 other different occasions, once again in Tuscaloosa, once in Hoover, and once in Bessemer. The last time I saw it in Hoover was at an apartment complex at the top of a huge hill with a great overlook. It was nighttime and I was with friends. Over the overlook, I saw a gray craft facing my direction that looked similar to a Hoth fighter. I mean, forgive the Star Wars references, sorry. As soon as I saw it, it took off to the right, extremely quick and silent. The times in Bessemer and Tuscaloosa, the trapezoidal shape appeared in the sky solid white, stretched to twice its length, and the bottom shot up to the front like it hit light speed or something. I do frequently see what I like to call streaks. They look like shooting stars, only very low, and they move slower, but they have tails that stream behind them, and they can also appear in many different colors. Another strange story is one night when I had a dream in Tuscaloosa. In the dream, I couldn't see or hear anything, but I could feel things. I was laying on something cold, and I felt what seemed like rubber between my legs around my junk. It was very strange to me since a lot of people who report abductions report sperm and eggs being taken for breeding programs or something. The next morning, I went to let my dog out in the backyard, which is very small. To the left of the patio, there was a solid white ring in the grass that was maybe 8 or 10 feet wide. I showed my mother, and she had told me that she had heard a noise that woke her up the night before, but she just dismissed it. Another extremely confusing experience I had occurred in my driveway in Tuscaloosa. To give you an idea of where this occurred, look up Shelton State Community College. The house was less than a quarter of a mile from the campus in the Englewood neighborhood. It was nighttime, and I heard this static that I could compare to a jet. I looked over, and directly above the community college was a light blue slit in the sky. I would say it was maybe 200 yards long, completely vertical, and what looked like white electric currents coming off both sides of it. I looked at it, and maybe about 25 white things shot out of the slit to the left at one time at a quick pace, leaving trails behind it that I had previously just told you about. After they passed, the bottom of the slit went upward and the slit closed, and it made a strange sound, and then it was gone. After all these experiences, I started doing some research because I was confused. I couldn't understand why I was having these abnormally large amount of experiences. I can't tell you why. I wish I could. In my research, I found there is a type of UFO witness called a contactee. And these people are similar to abductees, but they seem to be always kept up with whatever is actually contacting them. I have no idea why I've had so many experiences, and I've only listed a fraction of them. My best guess would be that since I acknowledged the presence of whatever it was I was seeing, it decided to keep in touch with me. It's kind of a gift and a curse. There are so few people I can talk to about it and be taken seriously. I want to seek hypnotherapy to see if there might be anything else I can uncover. Up on the roof. When my mom and her friend Lisa were teenagers, they were up on the roof of Lisa's house, and they saw a bright light in the sky. Next thing they knew, the light was gone, and the thing is, they thought they'd been on the roof for like 15 minutes, but something like 3 hours had passed. Mom doesn't remember anything about what happened during that time, and Lisa simply refuses to talk about it. She would answer my mom with things like, "I don't know," and just drop it for a long time when my mom would ask. So, a couple of months later, my mom moved away and lost contact with Lisa for about 10 years, and she finally met up with her again and immediately noticed that something was odd with Lisa. Lisa appeared very distant to her with a very dreamy demeanor, like she was really happy and at peace for no good reason at all. After they talked for a bit, Lisa brought up the incident on the roof. Mom said she still didn't really remember anything about it, but Lisa remembered. She remembered everything. She said that at first it was all in bits and pieces and she couldn't really remember any of it clearly. She was confused and scared and wanted to avoid discussing it. Then, as time passed, she began to remember more of that night. She remembered it all clearly, and she remembered that the other 3 times she was abducted after that clearly as well. At first, whoever it was paralyzed her somehow and did all sorts of invasive experiments on her, but by most of the recent times, they stopped probing her and began talking to her. They didn't speak any English or any other human language, but somehow she could understand everything they said, even though she can't speak their language herself. Apparently, they told her all sorts of things, stuff about space, Earth itself, and most shockingly, predicted years beforehand that she would get pregnant in a specific year, and it would be a stillborn, and that she would never be able to have children again. They also told her that it was not her fault, and they even made an attempt to save her from this fate, but unfortunately they were unsuccessful. They also told her that they had abducted my mother another time after that first incident. My mom says she has no recollection of any other potential abductions, but she does have recurring nightmares of being abducted, but she's almost sure that they're just that, nightmares. Anyway, Lisa told Mom that every time she speaks with them, she comes to understand this truth more and more, and when Mom inquired what the truth was, Lisa just said that, "You'll know eventually," and she says that once she learned of the truth, everything became wonderful. Mom has seen her a few more times over the years, and we still live in another state away from her. She apparently has a pretty normal life and doesn't obsess over alien stuff like some supposed alien abductees do, and she only ever brings it up in passing, not like it's a central part of her daily life. The Tall Man. My dad has over a dozen stories like this. He grew up in rural Illinois, near a woodsy area, and UFO activity was apparently high back then. I don't know if it was just my family or the whole area, but my dad and my grandpa would sit on the porch and watch lights fly around their house for fun. I mean, this was a long time ago when my dad was a kid, and he's in his 60s now. He and my grandpa would watch the stars dart around like laser lights and laugh about it. I mean, shit's mind-boggling to me now. I've only seen this kind of thing happen once or twice, and when it did, it freaked me out. Besides that, a bunch of other weird shit would happen to my dad, isolated earthquakes, in Illinois, that nobody else felt, bright orbs floating around in the sky and following him around, etc. It's been a while since he told me these stories, but one of the particularly weird ones has always stuck with me. FYI, I'm completely aware that it sounds like my dad was just fucking with me, and trust me, I'd prefer to believe that. But I have good reason to trust him. For starters, he's never lied to me about anything else. He wasn't the type of person to make up shit for just show. He also had absolutely nothing to gain for making this shit up. He never tried to publish it or even write it down. He just would talk about it every once in a while. Anyway, so my dad was in his teens. He was out in his driveway for whatever reason, doing whatever people did when they live in a woodsy rural area, and his parents weren't home. They were out shopping at work or whatever. Suddenly, this big black car pulls into his driveway. Tinted windows, completely black. My dad just kind of watched it pull in, not sure what to think. Something to remember here. Not only is this a rural area, but it's 50 years ago, and people were a lot more trusting back then. Nowadays, you'd be crazy to leave your front door unlocked, but back then it was no big deal. So this strange black car pulls into my dad's driveway. He said it made no noise at all, which my dad noticed right away. The door opened, and out stepped a super tall, fair-faced white guy. He had blonde hair, an extremely well-tailored black suit, and black sunglasses on. Right away, my dad could see there was something off about him. He looked too perfect, flawless skin, a childlike smile, and very overdressed for a hot summer day. He just looked so out of place. The man walked up to my dad and asked for his name. My dad was around 15 at the time and asked him why he wanted to know. The man smiled and explained that he just wanted to ask him a few questions and he meant no harm. Bemused, my dad agreed, but he was still wary of this strange man. First, the tall white dude asks if my dad lives here. My dad said yes, and asked why he wanted to know. The man had a completely relaxed, non-confrontational tone and seemed almost giddy, like he was really excited to be having this conversation. My dad said his childish, overzealous grin never faded in the least. He asked my dad if he had seen, felt, or heard anything that he felt was outside of the ordinary. My dad said sometimes, and again asked why he wanted to know. Again, the man just kept grinning, and by now my dad was feeling pretty comfortable. He had never seen this guy before in his life, and he didn't appear to be any kind of government agent. His behavior was far too unusual. Suddenly, the man's demeanor completely changed. His grin disappeared, and he looked worried. Without so much as a goodbye, he opened the car door, got inside, and drove away, still making no noise at all. A couple of minutes later, my dad's parents came back from shopping. Now for the really weird part. My mom saw the same fucking dude 30 fucking years later. She was in a bookstore looking to buy something. I don't know the details really, but when she turned around, she noticed this tall, fair-looking blonde guy in a black suit sitting at a table in the cafe, 30 or so feet from my mom. He was reading a newspaper, and sitting across from him was another dude dressed exactly the same as the blonde one. They looked strangely out of place, somehow too perfect, too clean. Now, my mom had heard the story about my dad before, and she actually recognized my dad's description of the man. He definitely stood out. So she was kind of taken aback, trying to figure it out. Maybe was it actually the man that Dad had seen all those years ago? The blonde guy noticed my mom looking at him. Again, his demeanor completely changed. He stood up, turned around, and quickly walked out of the bookstore with the second guy right behind him. What the fuck, right? I'm actually freaking out a bit thinking about this. I'm 22 now, and I have to wonder if I'm going to run into this awkward blonde stalker. It's like the Men in Black sent their most inept agent to follow my dad's family around. Or the most obvious alien ever is trying to study my family in our natural habitat. I don't fucking know. Sleepover Interrupted by Insomnia Acrobat. When I was about 12, my best friends and I used to sleep out on my friend's trampoline in his yard in the summer. We would gather our bed stuff and bounce around till we got tired, then eventually laid down and went to sleep. One evening, 4 of us were laying on the trampoline talking when we noticed that there was something floating over the woods nearby. You couldn't see it directly, but it blocked out the stars as it moved slowly. It was just a little higher than the tree tips' tops and completely silent. We were just some dumb kids, so we watched it. Slowly it drifted until it was directly over top of us. Then suddenly there was this light that I can't describe. It was more than blindingly bright. It was disorientingly, crippling bright, like it shone down into you. The next thing I remembered, we were all standing inside my friend's house, looking out his sliding glass back door at the object still hovering there, and then it glided away. We were all spooked, but we decided to go back out to go to bed on the trampoline. We were laying there for a while, and the next thing we knew, it came back again and did the exact same thing. And again, We found ourselves inside looking out the back door. Beyond all reason, we went back outside to bed again. The same thing happened again. We finally decided to sleep inside with the lights on. My friends and I lost touch as we grew up, but when I was 18, I heard one of them was in town. I ran into him at a party one night and pulled him to the side to ask him about that night, as it had bothered me for some time. His response has shaken me to this day. I cannot describe his reaction sufficiently. He looked at the ground and said, "I don't want to talk about it." I was kind of shocked by his response, so I didn't know what to say. He got up and walked out, and I stayed sitting there thinking about what just happened. I got up after a minute to see if I could find him, but he'd left immediately after. That was it. Haven't seen him or the others. But his response was enough to let me know something strange definitely went down that night. I don't know if I want to remember. Campfire, submitted by Axel F. First off, yeah, my name is Axel. I threw in the F just based on Axel Foley from the Beverly Hills Cop series, laughing out loud. This happened when I was 19 years old, spending time at my family's cabin in the Adirondacks. We had a family-owned camp on an unbelievably gorgeous lake and spent every summer up there as well as a few times in the winter. Can't say enough about the Adirondacks to anyone who's never been there. They kick serious ass and you need to go. At this time, I was up there with my family and my cousins along with my girlfriend at the time. Our property has neighbors to one side, but the other side is pristine forest that can't be sold and is part of the park. Makes our place that much more desirable. Anyway, there were 4 of us all around the same age, my girlfriend and 2 cousins, enjoying an evening of raucous games of Uno and more than a few brews and spirits. An excellently great way to enjoy a summer night after spending a day water skiing. My cousin Joe was the first to notice something at the edge of our property on the forest side. He said he thought he saw a guy standing there, and at first thought it was just a neighbor passing through. But when he brought it up, I said that our neighbors weren't there that week, but it could have been someone from farther down the road cutting through. Which would have been odd, but still possible. He said it was too dark to really see who it was, and I thought maybe he'd even seen a bear, which put me on alert as we do have black bears wandering around from time to time. They usually leave everyone alone, but occasionally they do come right up to people's cabins or homes. The night went on, and my cousin Evelyn said, "Hey, there he is again." I stood up with my mag light and shined it over towards the forest, which was about 20 yards away across our well-cut lawn. I was pointing in the wrong direction, and Evelyn said, "No, over there," and pointed a little closer to the edge of the lake. I played my light over to where she was pointing, and everyone was looking when my flashlight caught something shiny. It was black, but somehow shiny, like a wetsuit or someone who was wet, and their clothes they were wearing were shining back. The figure wasn't there for long, and I couldn't really tell if it was a person, but it was certainly something upright, and it moved back into the trees quickly when the light fell on it. We could all hear something walking through the trees and cracking on the branches, and I called out, "Hey, you okay? Do you need something?" But there was no answer. Instinctively, I got up and started walking towards it with my girlfriend, and Evelyn saying to not go after it. That's when Joe yelled out, "Hey, there's someone else over here," and pointed in another direction, a little ways up from the water, farther from where we had just spotted this other person, or thing. I threw my flashlight in that direction, and the same flash of something shiny shone back, but this looked like a human figure standing there. It too backed into the woods as I was walking towards it, saying, "Hey, who is that over there?" I threw my flashlight in that direction, and we saw the same flash of something shiny. Whatever it was backed into the woods again, and as I was walking towards it, I said, "Hey, who is that over there?" When I stopped talking, there was silence except for the crackling of our fire. I strained to listen, but I didn't hear anything in the woods. I went back to everyone near the fire pit, and I said, "I have no idea what the heck is going on." Joe had gone inside to get my uncle and my father, and we told them what we had seen when they came out. They didn't have any answers for us either, But my dad said he was going to leave our floodlights on for the night in case someone did come back that had bad intentions. We're quite far away from any kind of law enforcement, so the safer the better. Not trying to go into a negative spot, but we also wanted to be safe. Everyone went inside to continue talking about what we had seen and try to enjoy the rest of the night, and I went back out once to make sure the fire had burned out. My girlfriend came out with me, and we were just standing there talking for a second as we heard everyone inside laughing. That's when we heard a little splash down at the water. I didn't jump to conclusions. It could have been anything, to be honest with you. We've got plenty of animals that go in and out of the water all the time. But then we also heard what sounded like swimming, not like the normal splashing of legs and arms in water, but just something moving through the water. This was all out of the range of the floodlights of our place, and I strained to see if I could see anything out on our beach area, but I didn't see anything. Joe and my other cousin realized what we were doing and came back outside, and we told them what we had just heard. That's when the cliché part of my story happened. As we stood there looking around the property and the lake, we saw a beam of light shoot down from the sky. It was a bright neon yellow, as God is my witness. It went straight down into the lake for about 5 seconds and then just went away. It was so fast I had a hard time following it up into the sky where it had come from. As best I could tell where it had come from was a dark triangular-shaped ship, a spaceship if you will, because it didn't look like any plane or other aircraft I have ever seen. Lightning was written off right away as there were no storm clouds in the sky. Suddenly, 3 lights came on each end of this triangular-shaped ship, and with an audible boom, the thing shot straight up into the air. It wasn't a massive break-the-sound barrier type boom. It actually sounded like 2 boats bumping into each other, but loud enough for us to hear it. Then there was nothing but silence, and we all stood there looking over the lake at nothing. Joe said, "Okay, that's enough of this shit for me," and went back inside, and we all followed. I told my dad and uncle what we had just seen, and they shook their heads. They thought they were being led on and maybe we were pulling their legs. But we weren't. For the rest of the night, I kept looking out over the lake and stayed up past the time everyone else turned in for sleep. I just sat there with my arms around my girlfriend in our living room looking out the plate glass windows over the lake. We didn't see anything else. So that's my interesting tale of possible alien visitors to our camp in the Adirondacks. I've looked all over the place for stories and reports of UFOs and stuff, and come across a few from our area. I mean, who knows? Some of them were a little bit wilder than my tale, and I can only vouch for what we saw, and not any of the other crazy stories I've heard. Were we visited by aliens that night? Men in black? I have no idea. But as crazy as it was at the time, it's been so long ago, it's now just a tale we tell over campfires. Campfires like yours, Uncle Josh. My Encounter with Flying Saucers by Matthew the Deity. I have a good amount of stories that I could share since I have had a few strange and weird experiences throughout my life, despite only being 19 years old. But I don't think I'll ever forget this experience, despite even convincing myself that this was me possibly having a fever or a realistic dream, even if the experience felt very, very real. Truthfully, I don't fully believe that this had really happened, but I could be wrong. That's up for you to decide. When I was 7 or 8 years old, I lived in a small house that got shot up not even a full week before we moved out, with my mom and my stepfather and stepsister at the time. I had an irrationally strong fear of the dark, and since my stepfather was quite cruel towards me, they liked to keep me paranoid and took away my opportunity to sleep easily by taking away my TV, which was the only thing that helped me sleep. My mom agreed since she wanted me to get past my fear of the dark, but I digress. One night, I remember being extra paranoid and scared, so I slept in my sister's room since she had a convenient bunk bed that I could sleep in sometimes. I slept on the top bunk that night and tried sleeping, but alas, I was too paranoid even then. It was the middle of the night. If I had to guess what the time was, then I'd say it was probably around 1 a.m. on a school night. I tried distracting myself most of the time until I passed out when I was younger, so I tried the same thing that night. I remember seeing a strange light illuminate from the blinds, and I immediately took interest. I thought it was a car at that moment, but I was scared of it being a possible stranger trying to stalk up. Since my stepsister was in the room, I managed to pull myself together enough to peek through the blinds and see, not a stranger, and definitely not a car, but a strange flying saucer that flew nearby my house, and above the house across the street. I remember my eyes widening as I looked around more and saw another saucer not too far away from it, slowly floating to the right of my house and in the corner of my eye. I remember seeing something large hover right above my house. I looked up and saw this mammoth of a saucer float over and above my house completely. I couldn't even see it once it moved more, but I remember it having almost a stereotypical light on the bottom of the ship, but a strange darker color to the whole thing. One of the smaller ships followed with it, and I remember being too scared to run to my mom's house and fear that it would be aware of my presence, or possibly make the ship provoked into taking me and my family away so they wouldn't be discovered. So I slowly and hesitantly moved forwards to the living room to look outside the window to see if it was still around, since it floated in said direction. And it was gone. But our trash can had fallen over, and the sound of distant barking echoed through the night. I didn't know what to say or how to feel once it was over. I couldn't tell even then if I had hallucinated that or if I was dreaming, but I was definitely left speechless at that moment. And I knew if I told my mother, she'd just laugh and say, "Oh, it was just your imagination." I hadn't told anybody this story before until now since I can't sleep, and it's 6:30 a.m. Despite how real it felt at that moment and how clearly I remember it, I still can't bring myself to fully believe that happened because of its slight stereotypical look. But remembering that event so clearly, despite barely thinking about it for a few years, has left me, scratching my head again, since if that was a dream, how come I didn't remember any other dreams from when I was a kid? The Missing Hour by Polaris 3141 Throwaway. We were driving in the UK from a friend's dinner party. We'd set off around 10 p.m. for a 15-minute drive home. It was myself, my wife in the front, and my 3 sons in the back of the car. We were driving near a United States Air Force base in the southeast of England along a long, straight piece of road where there was an incredible flash that the wife and I noticed, and it seemed to wake up one of the elder sons in the back. He would have been around 12 at the time. Something, I have no idea what, flew with absolute silence over the car. I saw it, my wife saw it, and the son in the back who was awakened by the flash saw it. Something flew right over us so close you could touch it, and it was big. We got home, discussed it a bit, and concluded the flash was a flare from the USAF base, and the large object that flew over us may well have been a Eurasian eagle owl. One had been spotted in the area. The incident was promptly forgotten. Fast forward just over a decade, and me and my son who was woken by the flash were talking about this weird event over dinner, when the youngest son, who didn't wake up during the event, tells us how he remembered it happening. He recalled an event that was vastly different from ours. He had never told the story before. He thought it was a dream until we started talking about it, and he described how the car was stopped when we saw the flash. We weren't moving, and the low-flying object sat on top of us for a few seconds, then flew off before the car started again. Apparently, I completely ignored this stop and start and simply continued driving. Now here's the really cool bit that we never realized. My wife had made arrangements to call her sister when we arrived home safely. We left around 10 p.m. for a 15-minute drive, as I mentioned. My wife called her sister around 11:45 p.m. to say we had arrived home. I have no idea what happened that night. I was completely sober. My youngest son insists that something very odd happened. My wife is adamant that we took approximately 90 minutes to do a 15-minute drive, and her sister backs this up. I might not know what happened that night, but I am secure in the thought that something did happen. UFO in the Woods, submitted by Angie J. I just watched Nope on Prime Video and thought of something that happened to me when I was in my mid-20s and lasted a little bit longer. Something I normally don't talk about, but felt compelled to share with your listeners. I've been a follower since the beginning and actually followed you from that radio show you used to do. Anyway, this is what happened to me. After graduate school, I wanted to take some time away from school. That, and I had broken up with my boyfriend of 4 years. I had also lost my grandmother, who was extremely close with me, and all of it happened within a year. New beginnings, closure of old stories. I knew I would have some jobs lined up for me based on my schoolwork and my internships I had done, so I wanted to take a few weeks to just take stock of my life. Having grown up in an outdoors family, the simplest thing I thought of was to go hiking and camping by myself. Of course, this idea had its detractors. I mean, how could a young woman go off into the wilderness by herself, right? That was my mom. My father was not one of those detractors, as he had grown up doing things just like this. Maybe that's where I got the idea in the first place. I had been hiking before and done solo hikes too, but those solo hikes were usually just for a weekend. This one I was planning to be gone at least a week and a half, and I had done all my due diligence, mapped out where exactly I was going to go, looked for lodging where I could get it outside of being on the trail alone, all that kind of thing. I prepped for over a week getting ready and was going to have my mom drop me off at point A, and in a week and a half have my father pick me up at point B. I will only say that this took place in Virginia, not super far off the beaten path, but far enough away from society that I would likely be by myself most of the time, and I was looking forward to that. Just walking, relying on myself and my skills, journaling and reading. Clearing my head, so to speak, of all the craziness, cramming 6 years of school into 4.5, and the not-so-good things that had happened during that time. It really led to me to just shutting things off and enjoying nature and some silence. On the morning of my drop-off, my mom was giving me all kinds of stupid advice that didn't apply to what I was doing, but I hugged her and told her everything was going to be fine, and I was going to look forward to seeing her shortly. She stayed at the trailhead longer than she needed to, and eventually I picked up some technology that I brought along hoping not to use, my cell phone. I had walked up the trail and part of it overlooked the parking lot where she had left me, and I picked up my phone, turned it on, called her and said, "Mom, you can leave now, I'm fine." Then I shut my phone off and got on with my walk. The first couple of days were exactly what I was looking for. I did run into other hikers on the trail and often stopped with them to break bread or just chat. But at night I was usually by myself, save for one extremely funny night that involved two 60-somethings having a little too much hooch and laughing well into the evening. I did appreciate it at the time. It was good to see two people their age enjoying themselves in their surroundings. On the night of the fourth day out, the clouds rolled in and I was expecting rain for the evening. I wanted to get to a lean-to before the rain and picked up my pace to make sure I could get there. I also knew I would have to hike to get water for my meals and clean up, so I was doubly anxious to make sure I would be out of the rain with the storm that was coming through. I did know there was going to be a storm, as that morning I was passing through a little town to get some food supplies, and the wonderful person at the market I went to let me know about the weather. I got to the lean-to in time before the rain and also made the hike to a spring to fill my canteens and my collapsible water bag. I made dinner quickly and figured I would just be snuggling up in my sleeping bag and enjoying the unbelievably gorgeous view I had from the top of this mountain, looking over a valley. Everything was so green, and the dark clouds made everything that much greener, if it makes sense. So the storm came. I was warm and dry, full of food, and enjoying my book. This was around 7 at night, and everything gets darker out in the woods, and this was no exception. When the lightning came, I put my book down after straining my eyes in the quickly dissolving light, and just watched the dance of the storm across the valley. The storm was slow and lasted for about an hour, and eventually turned to just rain. The sound of rain on the lean-to was making me sleepy, and I drifted off. A little before midnight, I was awoken by a loud noise, and I should be careful how I describe that. This was not a mechanical noise. It was actually a big buck that ran through the clearing where the lean-to was. As I opened my eyes and let them adjust to the dark, I saw what I thought was a weird-shaped cloud, It was drifting slowly over the valley, and it dawned on me that this was not a cloud. I knew it wasn't because after the other clouds had left, the stars were out shining brightly, and this thing was blocking a good chunk of those stars as it moved slowly across the valley. My mind wasn't really processing what I was seeing. It wasn't some Close Encounters of the Third Kind moment. It was just me watching a big dark shape blocking out a portion of the sky. Wishing there was someone with me to see this, I then got a quick shock. A bright bluish-gray light came from the bottom of the thing I was looking at. I couldn't see it hit the ground or the tops of the trees deeper into the valley. I just saw the light play out from the bottom of this what I now consider some sort of ship. As the craft slowly moved in a southerly direction, the light went with it, and then it would shut off, and then it would come on again after a few seconds. And then the craft stopped totally. The light that was shining down went out, and this thing that I was looking at suddenly sped up and was gone, without a sound. It just shot forward and left my viewpoint. I was in awe of the size of this thing, the fact that it never made a noise, and the fact that it seemingly disappeared as it took off like a shot. I pinched myself to make sure I was awake. Then I got a drink of water and immediately found my journal in my pack and started writing down what I saw, and scribbled a very bad drawing of what this thing looked like. I went back to sleep thinking about this thing and was awake very early the next morning. I had a big day of hiking in front of me, so I got a quick meal and got on the trail to move to my next point. I traversed over a couple of peaks and got into a new valley. I decided to stop for the evening and sleep in my tent rather than move on to another shelter. It was this nice grassy bald that I was on. After setting things up and getting something to eat, I reviewed my progress and I was right on time for my pickup. I read a little into the evening and then just sat enjoying the warm breeze and the silence of nightfall. Sometime around 1 a.m., I woke up for some reason. Well, there was a reason. It was very bright outside, like more than daylight bright. For 1 second I thought maybe there was a helicopter or something flashing a light down on me, but I then realized there was nothing but the breeze as far as sound. The light went away and I scrambled for the door of my tent and unzipped it. I stuck my head out and saw nothing unusual around me. I looked up at the stars off to my right in the sky, and then looked up. There was nothing but blackness. I immediately thought of the thing I'd seen the night before and put 2 and 2 together. Whatever it was back. I crawled out of my tent and stood up in my unlaced boots, looking up at this thing that was covering most of the bald. I'm sure it wasn't that big, but it certainly was big enough to block out all the stars directly above me. Then came the light again. Unbelievably bright, shining right down on me. The breeze that had been blowing the grass gently to the east suddenly seemed to just mat everything down, as if a huge whoosh of air was coming down along with the light. I couldn't say how long it lasted, but it seemed like minutes. I put my arm up to shield my eyes to this bright light, and that's all I remember about the rest of the night. I woke up the next morning in my sleeping bag with the tent flap open. As I took stock of the situation trying to get my bearings, my thoughts went back to that bright light. I looked to put my boots on, but realized they weren't inside my tent, and when I poked my head out into the bright sunlight, I saw them about 10 feet away. I figured for whatever reason I must have just left them out there and went back into the tent, but I didn't remember doing any of that. I just remember shielding my eyes and then waking up. I was a little unnerved, to say the least. I quickly made some breakfast, then broke camp and started walking again, with more than a few thoughts bouncing around in my head. What the heck was that craft that I had seen 2 nights before? And more importantly, what happened to me just a few hours earlier? I bumped into some people that late morning, and one offered me some sunscreen. Said I must have been enjoying myself a little too much out in the sun. I asked him what he meant, and he said, "You've got one hell of a sunburn." It wouldn't be until the next day when I stopped in a little town that I would see my reflection and agree. The funny thing is, there was no burning sensation the way that you normally get with a sunburn. At least the way I burn when I'm in the sun without any protection. Nothing happened until the last night of my walk. I was staying in another shelter with a young couple from Georgia. We were making small talk, and I was lamenting that I was coming off the trail the next day, and they were continuing on their journey heading south. Somehow or another, our conversation turned to the joy of the trail and the peacefulness of the nights. That's when I brought up the strange things that I had seen, and prefaced it all with the fact that I was not trying to weird them out or have them sleeping with one eye open next to some weirdo in a shelter. They listened to my story with rapt attention and offered some solutions to what I had seen. Perhaps it was just some aircraft that was cruising through the area and as a joke shined a bright light down on me. I laughed along with them and said that maybe I was on America's Most Wanted. And then I said it was probably just nerves of being alone and souping up a normal occurrence. But that night, I did wake up again. My companions were asleep, and I didn't see anything when I looked into the sky, but I heard a strange, high-pitched frequency in my ears. It didn't last very long, but it came back after a few minutes, and did so for about an hour before I forced myself to go back to sleep. The next day, I said goodbye to my trail friends and made my way to the trailhead where my father was going to pick me up. Throughout the morning, I kept hearing that strange frequency and thought maybe I was getting an ear infection or something. When my dad picked me up and drove me home, I didn't say anything about the strange things that I saw on the trail. I just talked about the peacefulness and all the wildlife I had encountered. But that night at home in the shower, the sound came again. I told myself I would monitor it, and if anything stayed or got worse, I would go see the doctor. That night was quiet after having dinner with my parents and brothers, and we were all just sitting out on the patio having a couple of beers. Everyone decided they were tired and were heading inside, but I stayed outside on the patio a little longer, now thinking about my next moves I had to make in my work life and life in general. I cracked open a third beer and was just looking up into the night sky, when a dark shape quietly slipped over my parents' house and blocked out the stars I'd been looking at. The strange frequency came into my ears again, and I just stood looking straight up. The flash of light came again, and I again put my arm up to block my eyes from its brightness. My dad was still awake inside in the kitchen and noticed the bright light. He came out to see me and also looked up at this bright, intense light shining down into our yard. As soon as he got there, the light went away, and we both silently watched as this black shadow moved quietly through the night and away from the house. The stars came back out again as it left. I then told my dad what had happened on the trail, and he just stood shaking his head looking at me, wondering what was going on. We talked earnestly about UFOs and strange phenomena, but couldn't come up with any rational explanation for what he had just witnessed and what I was experiencing. After a while, I finished my beer, and while we were both still excited, we went inside and fell asleep on our living room couch, my dad in his recliner. Nothing happened after that. I got a job in San Francisco and moved out there, where I have lived for the past 22 years. I've always been interested since then with UFOs and listened to lots of podcasts and watched lots of documentaries about it. I especially like the first-hand stories I hear on channels like yours. And only one time since that, over 22 years, did I have anything like a similar experience. One night, about 6 months after giving birth to my first son, I was restless and went out onto my back deck. And I looked up at the sky and saw everything had been blacked out again. It looked similarly like the things that I had seen so much earlier in my life. And just like then, the dark shape above me slowly moved away and brought the stars back. Looking back on it and digesting all of it, I truly believe that I saw something either out of this world or generated by something in this world that not everyone is supposed to see. Why it followed me so many years later, I couldn't say. I can't say what happened on that night where I left my boots out in the elements after the bright light had come, and I don't go down the rabbit hole of being abducted or anything like that. But the truth is, everything is on the table. I can't unsee what I saw, and I can't not think about the experiences that I've had. I spend the only time I do think about this wondering if anyone else has had a similar experience, which from everything that I've heard and seen points to the fact that I can't possibly be the only one. What did that thing want with me? Why did it come back more than once? Will it come back again? I guess I'll just have to wait and see. I was abducted. Submitted by Sherry. This happened one night after I got out of work at Tim Hortons. I lived in a town called Meaford. You wouldn't know where it is. It's a couple hours north of Toronto. I had just broken up with my boyfriend and just wanted to go down to the water and have a cigarette and cry. This has nothing to do with the story, but he'd cheated on me with one of my closest friends, and I was really sad. So, I put on my iPod and started walking, listening to, of all bands, The Cure, right? How to make yourself feel better? Listen to the most depressing music you can find. It doesn't matter, I guess, but I was walking past a school on my way to the water, and I looked up at the night sky with tears in my eyes, and I saw this triangle-shaped thing out of the corner of my eye. I kept walking and looking up at it. I took my headphones out, but it didn't make any sounds as it glided overhead. At one point, it was right above me, and I knew it was real because I couldn't see the stars anymore, just this big black triangle shape. I decided maybe going to the bay wasn't a good idea and thought I'd go back and cut through the schoolyard to get home. I stopped walking, turned around, and started going fast to get there. And when I looked back, the thing in the sky was not there. As I cut across the school parking lot, a bright light hit down on me and I froze. It was like I couldn't move. I remember trying to scream and raise my hands, but I couldn't. But I could still breathe in all of that. The light got brighter and brighter, and for a minute I don't remember anything else that happened. When I opened my eyes, I was on this table like a hospital gurney. I wasn't strapped down or anything, but I couldn't move my arms or legs. My vision was blurry, but I could make out these strange things coming over to me and standing over me and looking down on me. I screamed out, but one of the things put this balloon thing in my mouth that filled up and I couldn't yell. As my vision came into focus, I could see what was going on clearer. The things were gray with huge black eyes, and one reached out and touched my head, and for whatever crazy reason, it felt like it was trying to calm me down. Another one was dragging this metal object over my body, and I soon realized I was naked at that point. It stopped moving the thing at my abdomen, and I felt a pinch on the left side of my lady parts. I then blacked out again and woke up when I was laying up against a tree at the last place I remembered being, the schoolyard. I want to state clearly that I have never taken any drugs in my entire life, and I don't drink. I wasn't some wino who saw some bright lights after a bunch of Molsons or Carlsbergs. When I got up, I looked at my phone, and it was 1:45 in the morning, 4 hours after I had gotten out of work. When I got home, my mom woke up and asked where I had been. I just told her that I would tell her in the morning and went to bed. The next day, I did tell her what happened, and for once in my life, she believed me. She wanted me to go to the doctor, and I said okay, but they didn't find anything wrong at first. My doctor suggested I get an x-ray after I told him I woke up against a tree after blacking out. When the exam came back, she asked if I had ever had any issues with anything, and I said no, and she said, "I don't mean to alarm you, but there's something strange in one of your ovaries, but it was most likely just a benign cyst." I wasn't in any pain, and she basically told me to watch for any pain or whatever and to come back in 3 months for a follow-up. That was it. So, life went on, and a couple of months later I went back, and the same thing showed up, and my doctor determined that it was a cyst that wouldn't likely be an issue. I was still working at Timmy Ho's and met a really great guy and we started dating. One night we were messing around, and he was downtown, if you know what I mean. Then after my pleasure, he said, "I gotta be honest, I could hear something that sounded like a faint bumping." And I asked him what he meant, and he just rubbed my body and said, "I heard it when you closed your legs around my head." He put his head back down there and listened for a while, but said it must have just been in his head, but I was kind of worried. I went back to the doctor, and they wanted to do an MRI, and thankfully it came back negative. Since then, I've had 2 wonderful baby boys, and have not had any issues or anything since then. I can't explain what happened to me or why it did, but it did happen just like that. If anyone has any thoughts, please share with Uncle Jay. Thanks. The Thing in the Sky, submitted by anyone but me. Hello, I sent this email with more information that I hope you keep confidential, as it has a lot of personal information. A long time ago, when you were doing your Edge of the Unknown show on the radio station, I called in to talk to a guy you had on that was from MUFON. He said to get in touch with him, but no one ever got back to me, so I'm sending what happened to me again. In August of 2008, I couldn't sleep one night and decided to go for a walk around my neighborhood. I live in a town called Elma, which I know Uncle Josh knows where it is, but for anyone listening, it's a really pretty country town a ways outside of Buffalo in western New York. It was a fairly new subdivision, and my wife and kids loved it, and I did too. For the few weeks leading up to this, I was having terrible insomnia and just couldn't focus during the day. I was constantly hearing this humming in my head, and it would never go away. I tried all kinds of things to get it out of my system, but every night the hum would come. So on this night, I just got up and decided I would go out for a walk. It was really quiet, and the subdivision was just being built, so after a few houses, there was nothing but new foundations being put in, and no one out or about. Our street was ending in a bulb, so I got off the pavement and started walking across the grass and headed into a wooded area. Our neighborhood skirted on the edge of a golf course, and I, likely illegally, walked right through it towards a creek. While I was out there, the sky was clear as a bell. There was no moon, but all the stars were shining, and it was just calming me down. I was looking up at the Pleiades, and suddenly there was this big flash off to my left. It was like something came zooming into view and then just stopped. I looked over and saw this thing that all I can say is looked like two hubcaps stuck together. Don't get me wrong, it wasn't a flying saucer like in those cheesy 60s movies, but it was shaped like that. It didn't make any sounds, it didn't do anything other than just hover there, and I was on the edge of some trees just watching. This light like a spotlight came on, and it was playing all over the ground underneath this weird craft. I kind of backed up further into the trees because whether or not this was a government spaceship, UFO, aliens from Mars, I don't know. I was scared. After a few minutes of watching the light move around, I saw 4 figures walking around on the fairway of the golf course in front of me. They didn't look like the creepy shit you see in the movies. They looked like human beings. They were walking around with other little, I guess I can say, flashlights. And at then I decided I needed to get away, but I also needed to get back home. To do that, I'd have to go right by them. So I decided that I would go down to the creek, skirt around whatever the hell this was going on, and try to fake them out on the other side. As I was going, suddenly the trees lit up with light, and I started to run. At one point, I looked back and could see some of the figures I saw on the ground chasing me with their flashlights bouncing around. I ran, jumped into Buffalo Creek, and slipped on some rocks. I just sat down in the water, and I won't bullshit you, I started crying. But when I saw the lights at the edge of the trees, I kind of shrank down and just sat in the water, trying to be as quiet as I could. The light stayed shining around the edge of the creek, and then the giant bright light came overhead. And just like it came, there was a flash and it was gone. I was getting cold, but I didn't move for a long time. I finally got up and decided to get back to my house. I did, and nothing happened as I ran through the trees and then up my street. The next day, my neighbor Don and I bumped into one another cutting grass. Let me stress, I didn't tell anyone about this and even showered in our downstairs bathroom as my wife and kids slept, so no one knew what I had done or what I had seen. Don said, "Hey, how's it going, man?" and offered me a Coors Light, and we chatted under the sun looking at our new lawns. Then he dropped a bombshell. "Hey, this might sound weird, but did you see a bright light last night? I thought there was about to be a plane crash." "Not sure. I was watching TV until really late," I said. It wasn't until a few years later I admitted to him that I had lied about that and told him what had happened to me. Without missing a beat, Don said, "Yeah, when I lived on the other side of the creek growing up, we saw the lights all the time. Even these weird guys that always wandered around with flashlights." My heart dropped when he said that, but it made me feel better. We talked about the guys who protect the golf course, but it wasn't a ranger checking things out. It was 4 beings looking for something. After that, I never saw anything else, but I wanted to share it with you again. I wonder if you remember our conversation from so many years ago. Whatever that thing was in the sky, and whatever those things were, I'm glad I've never seen them again. My Alien Story, submitted by Anonymous. I heard your call for alien stories, and I hope it's not too late for your next episode. Thanks for the last episode of the Edge of the Unknown you did, by the way. More of that, please. Okay, I went out for a walk one night after getting into a fight with my mom. My dad took off when I was about 12, and I never saw him again. I found out later that he died in a failed robbery of a gas station, but I guess that's neither here nor there. My mom had to raise 3 kids on her own and also work 2 jobs, so she was just a tired lady. I was the oldest at that point. I was 16 and my sisters and brothers were 3 and 6. Grandparents helped out when they could, so that was good for us. But my mom and me got into an argument about something stupid, and I stormed out of the house with her yelling at me. I just wanted to have a chew of my beech nut, just go out for a walk to cool off. I actually thought about walking to my grandparents' house, but that was about 10 miles away, and I knew I would never make it. So I was just walking around this park that was near our house, and I sat against a baseball backstop. Just sat there thinking about running out of town and figuring out how to do something else out in Portland. I knew some guys that lived there. And suddenly, that's when I heard a rustling sound behind me coming from the grass. Before I could even turn around, I felt this cold thing on the temple of my head, and I blacked out. Before I did, though, I saw this thing standing next to me that looked like a little man with big eyes. I mean, it sounds silly, but it looked like one of those things in the band in Star Wars. You know, that band in that bar where Luke meets Han Solo? When I woke up, it was 7 in the morning, and a guy who spruced up the baseball field found me in the middle of it. The first thing he thought was that I was dead, and he called the police, so that kicked off a whole shit show of police and ambulance and stuff. They took me home. My mom was pissed and told me if I ever did something like that again, I'd be put in a reform school. When she calmed down, I told her what happened, and she sat looking at me and said, "Wait a minute." She called my grandparents and asked them to come over and watch my brother and sister, and they said, "Yeah, we could do that." My mom then drove me out to a nearby lake and said she wanted to talk to me. Basically, she told me something almost exactly what happened to me had happened to her. She had gotten into a fight with her mom and had run out of her house in a fit, and the exact same thing went down. After it, she said she had chronic migraines and could sometimes hear this crazy noise in her head. She hugged me and said it was going to be all right, and that she didn't mean to get mad at me, but please just to not run off again. I hugged her back and apologized for being a jerk, and I said I wanted to get a job to help pay for things, and that day I went to the McDonald's in our town and scored some work. But that's not where this ends. Everything was getting better. My mom got a really great job that paid very well at a law office, so she could quit her other job. My littlest brother went into preschool, and my other brother was in school, and I was getting ready to take the SATs. I was playing basketball and baseball at school, and working a few hours at night, and then longer shifts on the weekends at the McDonald's when I could. One night, in April of 2002, I finished a closing shift and was eating a cheeseburger just walking home. It was around 11:30, and I started to hear that strange noise that I heard before. At first I thought it was a scooter or something coming up the street behind me, but when I turned, there was nothing there. I saw a weird guy at the corner of my street just standing at the post box, and I thought I'd cut across a few backyards to avoid this guy. I hopped over a neighbor's fence and started making my way when I saw two little men who looked like the things that I had seen before. They were around the side of a pool that I was going past, and before I knew it, I was out like a light. I woke up about an hour later with the weird guy sitting next to me with my mom asking what happened. Sounds typical, but he was wearing a black suit and sunglasses. Mind you, again, this is the middle of the night. And after I told him what happened, he said he worked for some place with the government and said not to tell anyone about it, but he'd be back tomorrow to talk to me. He never came back. Anyway, that's all I got. Every once in a while I'll hear that strange noise in my head, but nothing else has happened since then, and I'm now 34. Creepy Thing Outside by Lauren O. One night, me and my girlfriends were watching Charlie's Angels in my basement. I was having a sleepover, and it was just the four of us watching TV, eating popcorn and Pepsi, and making prank phone calls to boys we knew at school. My mom finally came down and told us to settle down. We all knew that wasn't going to happen. We were all 15 at the time, and we were just being silly girls. Earlier, we'd been doing each other's hair and nails and talking about school and guys, and my one friend kept asking about this guy Brian who lived in my neighborhood. She had a serious crush on him, so even though it was now like 10:30 at night, we called him, and he answered. He told us to come over. It was only on the next block over from my house. I knew my mom would kill us if she knew what we were doing, so instead of going out the door, I got a stepladder and put it up to our basement window that we could crawl out of. In our nightgowns, we were laughing and trying to be quiet as we helped each other out of the window onto my driveway. We were going to run over to Brian's window and talk to him. I just remember it was cool out, and we were cold in our nightgowns, but we wanted to just run over, say hi, and then get back to my house. Oh, the rush you get when the things you think you're doing and being a rebel when you're a kid. We got over there, and Brian was at his window. We all talked for a few minutes, and then my friend said she wanted to talk to Brian by herself. So if the rest of us could just go hurry up and walk down to the sidewalk, that'd be great. We were all getting cold. We told her to hurry up, and we would wait for her. That's what we all heard, and we still talk about it to this day, this whooshing sound above us. And we saw a weird plane or something with just one red light on it stop above us. We whispered loudly to our friend that we had to get going, and she said okay and came running over. Before we could even turn around to go back to my house, we saw this green, midget-shaped thing across the street, kind of gliding towards us. It wasn't walking or running, it was just kind of floating and moving towards us. We all didn't say anything and just ran back to my house. It was a crazy scramble going back through my basement window, but we all got in. I closed the window and latched it, and then right then, these weird green hands slapped up on the glass. One of my friends screamed, and another slapped a hand over her mouth and told her to be quiet. Of course, my mom came down and asked what the heck was going on, and we said we just saw something scary on TV. She told us to settle down again and then went back upstairs. We all looked over, but the hands were gone from the window. I said we all needed to relax and watch Saturday Night Live. Around midnight, there was a slap on the window again, and the hands were back, with a face that had two big eyes looking in at us. Before any of us could scream, I said for everyone to be quiet. I got up, turned off the TV, and we all sat in the dark looking at this thing. Then we heard that whooshing noise again, very loud this time, much louder than before. We could hear it as we sat in the basement. The thing at the window went away, and it didn't come back. The next day after we woke up, after talking about it all night, we could hear my dad talking to my mom about some weird soupy stuff outside of his car and the basement window. He said it was some kind of green slime, and he was angry that it was all over the side of his car and started bitching about the neighborhood boys. Now he'd have to wash everything. We all looked at each other and wondered what the heck we had seen. I don't know about my friends and their families, but I never mentioned what happened that night to my parents until I was in my early 40s at Thanksgiving. Of course, it was always a topic with us, but I never spoke about it until then. Whatever that thing was that followed us home after that sound we heard, whatever you are, let's not meet. Thing from the UFO, submitted by Crystal, not Crystal Gale. Hi, my name is Crystal, and this happened in 1985. Scariest thing that has ever happened to me. I was driving home from a high school party. Totally sober, by the way. I was the deputy dog that night. I had the windows down, a smoke in my hand, and my two girlfriends were in the back seat of my Horizon singing along to Home Sweet Home by Motley Crue. Don't make fun of us. I was a metal girl, and we were all huge fans. Anyways, I was driving on the I-3 in Indiana going back to North Vernon, and suddenly this light popped up on the right side of my car. Not like directly next to it, but like off in the fields, the crops we were driving along. My friend Terry saw it and laughed and said it was a cop helicopter out looking for drunk girls, and we all started cracking up. The light went off, and I kept driving along when all of a sudden, the light was on the road about 100 feet in front of our car. There was no one else out driving, but I slammed on the brakes, and all of the fun we were having came to a stop. Janelle stopped my tape player, and we all just watched as this light played all over the road. Like I said, I had the window down, but we kind of heard a strange noise, not like a plane going overhead, but just this really weird noise that we could never explain. We just kept watching this bright light going all over the road. Before I could say anything, Terry said, "What the hell is that?" And the next moment, the light was all over us. It was like we were on stage at a Motley Crue concert, and the spotlight was on Vince Neil. I mean, it was so bright I had to close my eyes for a second. There was a flash, and the light went out, and we all started to talk about police helicopters trying to scare us. Janelle was on the left-hand side of the back seat, and she started to giggle that it was all a dream. I mean, she was a little bit more than tipsy after the party. But a second later, she started to scream, and Terry and I jumped up and asked, "What?" I turned around and saw this creature standing right outside her window. It was like this whitish gray thing with giant black eyes, and it had what I sort of guessed was a finger on the window. I hit the gas, but I didn't realize that I'd put my Horizon in neutral, so the engine just revved. But it made such a loud noise that this thing turned and went into the trees of this place called the Crossley Fish Center. It's kind of a wildlife refuge. We all screamed again. I put the car into gear and sped away. Janelle was literally going crazy and yelled out, "Look at that blue beam! There's a blue beam!" And I slowed down. I had to crane my neck around, but all three of us saw a dark shape in the sky with a blue beam coming down onto the ground. Then it shut off, and the dark shape shot off across the sky and didn't come back. I hit the gas again and drove to my parents' house on Oak, and my friends decided to stay the night at my place. I don't know what that thing outside the car was, but it looked a lot like the alien things you see on the History Channel. I don't think it was trying to get into the car, but I do think it was looking at us for a specific reason. As I look back, now it's kind of funny, and anytime I hear Motley Crue, I think of that night, think of that thing in the sky, and that weird thing we saw outside of my car. Strange Action in the Forest, submitted by Lone Walker 100. This happened to my best friend and me. I'll call my friend Paul. We were backpacking in northern Pennsylvania. I never really told anybody about this for fear of what might happen after our encounter out there, but Paul and I continued to talk about it after all these years. The first night, things went very well, and we were enjoying our time just traipsing around and having the awesome feeling of being out in the forest. We didn't see any other hikers. It was late in the fall, and there weren't too many other people around, so the trails were pretty much ours. Our second night, we stopped for the day and decided to just pitch our tents and start a fire. We used our little camp stoves for food, but this time we decided to have a campfire. I got some brush and other things together while Paul cooked us up some noodles and soup. We planned on being out there for a little while longer, just a couple of days, and we were actually going to be heading home the day after next. We got the fire going and our meal. We were just talking away with the sounds of the forest, and when the fire died down, it was a little after midnight. We decided to hit the hay. Right before we did, though, there was a huge flash of light, and what I can only call a ball of fire that screamed right over our heads. Paul yelled out that he thought it was a plane crash, but I knew that was not really what it was. There was a terrifically loud boom, and we could feel the ground shake underneath us. I yelled out, "I wonder if that was a meteor or something." We both decided that it would be a good idea to go check it out. I mean, it was literally right over the other side of the mountain that we were on. We got our boots on, put on headlamps, and started making our way up the trail, and as we got higher up, we could see the lights from what looked like a big fire, and we stopped for a minute. I said, "Man, we should find somebody and tell them about this." But Paul said he thought that anyone within a 20-mile radius would for sure have heard that boom and seen the flash in the sky. At that point, the fire was pretty big. When we got over the top of the hill, the trees were so thick we couldn't see much, but there was still a dying glow in the sky. We went on for about a half a mile before the trail started dipping low and came to a clearing at a turn. From this vantage point, we could see that the fire was slowly going out, and the trees in the center of where this thing hit had branches still on fire. Something looked like it was half buried in a now clear patch next to the creek. Paul wanted to get a closer look, but I wasn't sure. I mean, we had no idea if it was a plane or something else, but he just kept insisting that we should go look. I gave in, and we made our way quickly down the trail, and where it hooked left, we knew we had to go right to get closer to the object. Luckily, I'd been out there before and knew there was a fire road that ran alongside the creek on our side of it. The plane or whatever it was that had crashed was on the other side of the creek. We made our way through the woods, and after about 5 minutes we jumped over a ditch and started up the road to see what we could see. It was dead quiet out there, but we could still hear a fire crackling a little bit farther ahead of us, with the still burning trees. Before we could get there, though, from behind us we heard a vehicle or vehicles racing up the road. We turned and could see these white flashing lights flying up the bumpy road. We jumped into the ditch and then scrambled up off the road, into the trees, and watched as a bunch of dark vehicles went by with those lights flashing on the roofs of their vehicles. We hunkered down as we had no idea what those trucks were, who these people were, and we whispered as the flatbed went by, "What the hell is this?" If anyone is wondering, we had turned off our headlamps. There were no fire trucks, there were no local police or state police, just these dark-colored trucks. Paul said, "We gotta go check this out closer," and I said, "Fuck that." But after a minute, again, he convinced me we should go. We got back on the road and said we'd jump into the woods if the same thing happened if anybody else came along. By now our eyes were used to the dark, and with the aid of a clear sky, we didn't really need to turn our lamps on to get down the road. After a short walk, we heard a lot of voices shouting and the sounds of trucks crossing the shallow water. We ditched into the woods on the near side of the creek and sat in the growth right across from whatever had come down from the sky. There were a bunch of guys swarming around, something we couldn't see, and others were using fire extinguishers on the ground and also on the trees to put out the fire. Paul said, "Those guys are wearing gas masks, man." And he was right. They were. This whole thing came out of some sci-fi flick. It was just silly to me. But then we heard a louder noise and another big truck coming up the fire road behind us. It got to the creek and we saw it dip in, cross over, and on the back of it was one of those really big bucket loaders. The men all seemed to stop doing what they were doing, which was God knows what, while the smaller group of men talked, and finally one shouted and pointed over to where the thing was. I mentioned to Paul that it was funny that no local authorities were out there yet, and he just said, "Yeah, you're right." To make this long story shorter, this backloader thing backed off the truck and started working around where we were sure this thing was resting. We sat in the cold and dark for about an hour as this crew yanked something out of the ground and got it onto the large flatbed. Then another team of guys got to work throwing chains and straps, or whatever, I guess, over to hold it down. The backloader got back on its truck, and these strange guys just started to make their way back across the creek. We went through the woods back to the road, but stayed a ways back in the trees as they passed by. When the flatbed slowly went past, we could make out what looked like a missile with a large ball on the end of it. The ball was covered in something. It wasn't canvas or plastic, it was this shiny material. I couldn't say what it was. Right before it passed, behind the truck there was a loud shout from a truck, and Paul and I thought we were busted. But after another minute, the truck started moving again, and I should say that they didn't have their lights on this time as they left. We waited there for about another half hour, and Paul said, "Hey, let's go and see what happened." Again, I protested, and this time I said, "Man, for all we know, that was some kind of radioactive missile." He finally saw the wisdom in this, and we made our way back to our camp. I cannot stress throughout all the talk that we had, the fact that no one else came out there that night was our biggest talking point. It was hard to sleep, but we finally did, and when we got up, we did our hiking prep, and after breakfast started off on our next trek. Paul kept bringing up how we should go back and see what had happened, and I told him to just let it go for now. We could come back another time by car and see what there was. We were out there hiking for another day and made the loop to get back to my pickup. The two of us kept talking a lot about things, but mostly about what we had witnessed. All kinds of ideas were bounced around, and some made us burst out laughing. I said it was part of the Statue of Liberty's vibrator that somehow shot off her and landed way out here. And we still laugh at that one when we get together and talk. A couple of weeks later after this, I did some research and found a whole bunch of stuff on a strange crash in Kecksburg, Pennsylvania, which wasn't too far away, but it certainly had nothing to do with what we had witnessed. The Kecksburg case is a huge case in the UFO alien world from what I read about, but I couldn't expound on that any much more than what I read. A couple of years later, Paul went back there and took pictures of the crash site, now long overgrown with weeds and brush. The impact crater is still there, with a mound of dirt pushed up pretty high, over 10 feet, like a little hill next to the creek. I still wonder who those guys who showed up were. Was it the Army? The Air Force? Maybe some guys from some propulsion lab retrieving a failed project? I don't know of anything like that around here, but who knows in this world what is real and what isn't. I mean, for all I know, some storefront in a small little town is actually a front for something stranger. At the end of the day, I never saw a newspaper or TV report about the actions of that night. Zip. Zilch. What we saw was like it never really happened, but we know it did.